In this lecture, we are going to discuss two important cyber attacks, denial of service and distributed denial of service. So we'll start with the denial of service attack. So a denial of service attack is any attack which causes services to be either slow or unavailable to legitimate users. Now this includes examples such as crashing web or database servers so that users are no longer able to access them. You can also cause overloading of the web or database servers through bogus requests, or you could choke the network bandwidth through bogus traffic, such as we saw, ping traffic. You can send thousands of frivolous ping messages to choke the network bandwidth. But the basic aim is the same, either to deny legitimate service to users or make it so slow so that it becomes infeasible or impractical to use. Now, denial of service attacks usually originate from one single source or IP address, and that is why they're easier to detect and block. You could simply add rules in your firewalls which block that malicious IP address. However, there is another variation of the denial of service attack which is called DDoS or distributed denial of service, in which case you have attacks from multiple IP addresses simultaneously, and this type of attack is much more complex and harder to stop. So in the denial of service attack, the attackers send a flood of packets such as pings or bogus TCP requests in order to overwhelm the network. So if we see the diagram, what happens is that we have legitimate users accessing a web server, but this malicious attacker is sending fake messages in bulk in order to overwhelm the web server. Now, denial of service attacks are easier to detect and block because they originate from a single IP address. So you could just detect it and blacklist that IP address and add it in your security tools to block it. In contrast, in a distributed denial of service attack, you have multiple IPs which are used simultaneously to launch the attack, and they are much harder to block. So for example, if you have attacks coming from different IP addresses, it would be very difficult to detect and block all those IP addresses. Perhaps the biggest challenge is how to differentiate your legitimate users from fake users, because you'll always have legitimate users who are also accessing your web server, and it is very hard to differentiate between the two, whether it's a genuine IP address or is it part of a big network which is attacking your web server. So this is an ongoing area of research. So we have advancement in both sides, from the attacker's side and from the defense side as well. But generally speaking, this type of attack is not very easy, because not only the IP addresses are different, they are also usually dispersed around the world. Another related concept is bots and botnets. Now, hackers are usually secretive people. They don't want their original IP addresses or sources to be revealed. So what they do is that they hack a number of systems on the internet, and then they create a network of these bots, and then they exploit these bots to launch attacks on the destination or the victim. So in this way, not only they hide their identities, but they also have a very scalable attack. So they can have thousands of bots in their network and launch attacks. So the basic idea is that malicious software is installed on PCs and servers, and then these systems become bots or robots. And so basically this network of bots is controlled by the hacker. And so basically he sits behind the scenes, he hides his identity and still uses an army of bots to launch the attacks. The way it works is this. So the hacker, he basically hacks different systems. This is usually done through installing malware, which is delivered through emails, or users visit malicious websites which have links which install malware. But the point being that once the malware is there, these systems are converted into bots. Often the users are not even aware of it. And the malware opens backdoors, and whenever the remote commander or the hacker sends instructions, these systems launch attacks on the destination. Now this type of attacks is dangerous because, first of all, the identity of the hacker is unknown. So even if you're able to trace your attack to a bot, the identity of the hacker would still be hidden. And secondly, these type of attacks are very scalable. It's not uncommon to have thousands of bots in your bot network. So this attack is very scalable, and it can bring down even powerful web servers. Now the results of denial of service caused by bots or botnets are severe. The first could obviously be loss of service to your legitimate clients, and this is bad for your business. It may result in a loss of service to employees. So if your server is down, your employees may not be able to log in and carry on their regular activities. Obviously, all of this results in a financial loss. Kaspersky did some research and they said that an average denial of service attack causes a damage of around 1.6 million to companies. Perhaps an important factor is reputational damage. I mean, even if there isn't a significant financial damage, or if you are a big corporation which can, absorb financial losses, even then you'll have reputational damage, and people may no longer trust the security of your systems. So how do you protect against distributed denial of service attacks? One way is to use load balancing. In a distributed denial of service attack, you have malicious traffic coming from so many different IPs and sources. So what you can do is that you can increase the capacity of your backend. You can increase the number of servers so that your backend is also scalable and can handle additional load. So now, instead of all of the attacks focusing on one server, multiple servers are going to take off the load and they're going to distribute the load, and this provides some sort of a cushion for the organization to react. Now, eventually your backend has still a limited scalability, right? So if it's a very big attack, it will still eventually overwhelm your network. But you do get a cushion of time in which you can devise a counter strategy. And still, it is much better than having a single point of failure, one server which fails and brings down your corporate network. Another way to detect distributed denial of service attacks is through their patterns. So basically, we can observe any abnormal behavior using different techniques such as machine learning. But before you detect abnormal behavior, you first have to define what is normal behavior. So basically, normal behavior is determined by observing the traffic patterns in your network. For example, a very simple normal behavior could be that on average in a given day, your corporate network receives, say, 5 gigabytes of incoming traffic and 10 gigabytes of outgoing traffic, right? So if you see someday that you are observing 100 gigabytes of traffic which is outbound, then obviously this represents a deviation from the normal. And similarly, you can have many other statistics. For example, you usually receive your traffic from certain regions of the world, but if you see a lot of traffic from a new region of the world, then this can also be a trigger. So that's how you define normal behavior, and based on that you can detect abnormal behavior. So usually abnormal behavior is detected from logs, for example. This could be a sequence of web pages accessed. So for example, you know that normal users, they go to the home page, then they go to a certain page, and so on. But you detect a pattern which is totally unintelligent or weird or strange, and you see lots of users or IPs accessing your web application through that particular pattern, then this could also be abnormal behavior. Another example is time spent on web pages. So for example, you know that an average user spends, say, 15 seconds to 20 seconds on your login screen, but then you detect that there are users who are spending, let's say, 1 hour or 2 hours on your login page, then that is also a deviation from the normal behavior. Another could be request rate, obviously, the number of requests you receive per minute or per day. Another telltale sign could be if remote users are trying to access certain ports. So for example, we know that telnet port 23 is insecure. Similarly, HTTP port 80 is insecure. So normally all of your remote shells should be through port 22 on SSH, and for web applications you should be using 443. So if anybody is trying to access these vulnerable ports, then this could also be a sign that someone is trying to attack your network. Another important fact is that the correlation of traffic from different geographical regions. Say you receive 90% of your traffic from Asia, for example, right? And now you detect that you're receiving 90% of your traffic from Europe suddenly. Then this is also deviation from the normal. So the key point being that you have to define normal, and then based on that you can detect abnormal behavior. Another characteristic which could be used to make this differentiation is the packet types. So for example, you should only receive a limited number of, let's say, TCP sync messages, which are always sent when a client is initiating connection with your web servers. So say in a day you receive 1000 TCP sync messages. Even if you receive, say, 1500 or 2000, that's okay. But if you receive 20,000 TCP sync messages suddenly, then this means that there may be some sort of a distributed denial of service attack going on. Now please keep in mind, you can have legitimate situations in which you have these deviations, but it doesn't mean that it's always genuine. So you have to be on high alert, and you have to employ your security tools to dig further in and detect if it's a distributed denial of service. And that's one of the challenges, to differentiate legitimate users, legitimate traffic patterns from illegitimate traffic which is trying to destroy your network. Another interesting technique is to use IP blacklisting. So you can check the reputation of suspicious IPs and add them to your firewall rules in order to block them. Now there are several sources from where you can get this list of IP addresses. First of all would be your list that you build up yourself for your own corporate network based on the traffic patterns that you have observed. But there are also other sources. So for example, there are threat intelligence IP blacklists for known botnets and reflectors. And you should definitely consider adding them to your own blacklists, because the point being that you don't need to be attacked by each of these rogue elements, and only after that you add them to your firewall rules. Sometimes it pays off to be a bit proactive and keep on contact with latest threat intelligence IP blacklists and add them to your security tools. Some of the challenges in blacklisting particular IPs is that obviously IPs are dynamic. They change all the time. So it's not like there are IPs which will be fixed for several years. So it's always a fluid kind of a list. IPs are being added, IPs are changed. If an attacker suspects that his botnet has been detected, he may move on to different IP addresses and so on. IP spoofing is another problem. They may spoof legitimate IP addresses which belong to legitimate clients or servers, and you may think they're coming from legitimate users, whereas they are not. Another problem is obviously false positive. You may erroneously blacklist genuine IP addresses. So you have to be a bit careful in how you blacklist IP addresses. So this is an ongoing activity. It's not a one-time task. It has to be reviewed periodically and updated. Another powerful technique to prevent distributed denial of service attacks, and a technique which is widely being used today, because a lot of the companies, they don't have the time, resources to invest into developing their own in-house security teams, is to use content distribution networks such as Cloudflare. So what they do is that they offer protection against distributed denial of services by using several techniques such as load balancing, detecting attacks, and blocking them. So the traffic doesn't directly go to your network. So consider this example. This is your corporate network, and this is the public internet, and these are your users, or they may include attackers. So now, instead of the end user traffic going directly to your corporate network, it first goes to the third party solution, where it is checked for any problems such as any patterns of distributed denial of service attacks. And Cloudflare and similar solutions, they also provide some sort of load balancing. So they provide some sort of elasticity into your solution to absorb some sort of peak loads. And once the traffic is cleared, it is passed on to your corporate network. Now these type of third-party solutions, they make your job easier, because you kind of outsource a lot of your security features, so you don't have to worry about denial of service or distributed denial of service attacks and so on and so forth. Now that concludes our lecture on denial of service and distributed denial of service attacks. I'll see you in the next lecture.